Hey, welcome. My name is Zach Ayer, and I'm the Education Manager for United World Wrestling, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. This is the last webinar in this series looking at developing practice plans. In the first webinar that we had with this, we just looked at the introduction for what practice plans are and why they're important and some important parts about them. The second webinar, we looked at how to plan in risk management and how to look for ways to reduce risk or minimize risk by effective planning. So we looked at some strategies for that. The third webinar in this series looked at the theoretical framework. Like if you're going to put together a practice plan, what is the overall theoretical framework that you need to consider when putting that together? And then the last webinar was taking a look at practice plan essentials. What are those things and those different activities that we can implement into practice? We're looking at different drills, different ways to do live wrestling, different types of warm-ups. So all of those things factored in, how do we use those to build the practice? And then today is our last one, and this is going to kind of recap a number of things that we've talked about before, plus adding in some new information here as we look at designing and implementing a practice plan. Now, to get started, I'd like to start with a quote from Pablo Picasso. Our goals can only be reached through the vehicle of a plan. There is no other route to success. If we want our wrestlers to be successful, we have to have a great plan. And that's from the entire training plan down to the individual practice plan. And I think that when we start to look through that, that's what this entire series of webinars is on, is how to build a great practice plan. So today we're going to take a look at some key concepts. The first one we're going to take a look at is the idea of starting with weekly or bi-weekly objectives. So we'll talk a little bit about that and how do you implement looking at the bigger picture into this. The next thing we'll look at is the fundamental steps to follow, kind of what are those things we need to make sure we have in our practice plan as we go. Or what are some important activities that we need to have and how we arrange those. Then we'll look at the key components on a plan, like what exactly do we need to have listed and written on each practice plan as we go. So we'll look at those examples. Another, which is a big one for me, which is estimating the time for activities, like how long does it actually take to do this activity, this drill, this live session. So we'll take a look at that. And lastly, once we've got our practice plan, what are some tips just for running an effective practice? And again, I'm sure there's way more to each of these as we go. This will just be kind of an overview to help get you started and to build that great plan. So the first place is taking a look at is anytime I develop a practice plan, I always look at the bigger picture. I try to see and how this all interconnects into what I'm doing and what I want us to accomplish. So a couple of questions that always come up for me. Number one, what do we want to accomplish during the week or maybe 2 weeks? We have to look at it more than just one practice plan at a time. Sometimes we may look at it, what do we want to get done that week? What do we want to get done over the next 2 weeks, maybe even over the next 3 weeks? Because it leads to that next question, which is, how many practices do you have each week? And I think depending on the number of practices you have each week, depends on how far you should look at planning out. I know that for instance, like right now, we just started our wrestling season, and we have a very intense season of wrestling during our time where we're going to wrestle the next 4 months. And during the next 4 months, we're going to have probably between 70 and 75 practices. And we're going to wrestle probably between 25 to 35 matches during that time. And so, as we look at this, I'm going to be practicing somewhere between 4 to 6 practices every week. So when I plan practice out, I'm looking at just 1 week at a time. So it kind of depends on how often your training schedule is and how often you're practicing to determine what those practices and how far you should schedule out. My recommendation would be to look at planning out 5 to 6 practices at a time. Like for me, that's going to be 1 week. Like I typically plan out 1 week, and then I start working on the next week's plan towards the end of that first week as we progress through and even make changes up until the Sunday when we start the new week on Monday. But I would typically look at 5 to 6 practice plans. I think that's a good overview to be able to see how it all connects together. Now, the next thing that I typically do, and I'm going to show you exact examples of what I've just recently done, is I'm going to make a list of the objectives for that time period. Like for those 5 to 6 practices, what do I want to accomplish? What are the techniques that I want to show? What are some of the activities and drills that I want to do during that time? And I'm going to make a list of those objectives of those areas that we want to work on during that time period. And then once I make that list, the next thing that I typically do is then I place those in the days that I want them to be done. So I start looking and say, okay, here's the list of the things that I want to get done this week. Here's our objectives. Here's the areas that we need to either improve or we need to teach. And then once I have those listed, my next step is to place them in a days. Actually, sometimes we'll literally write the day beside them. I'm going to do this on Monday. I'm going to do this on Wednesday, do this on Thursday, etc. So place them in the days. Now, by doing this, I think there's a few benefits that come from this. Number one, by having this and piecing it together in a much larger, concept, it allows you to blend practices together better. So you can start mixing, building in, like you're doing this one day and the next day you may review it. Or I might do it on day 1 and then day 3, I'm going to review what we did day 1. So I can kind of blend and how those go. So that way I'm helping kind of work together in a proper progression, because that's always one of our parts that we had talked about with minimizing risk, is making sure that we have everything planned in proper progression so we don't go too fast in the process and may run the risk of injuring one of our athletes. Another part that I think that this helps is maximizing learning. By putting it in a structured set and having it planned out for multiple days in advance of what this looks like, allows you to help maximize the learning, because you can introduce it and then you can reinforce it multiple times in different areas throughout the course of other practices. Another part too is when you're building this in, this also allows you to start working in towards, how you build up their either, the drilling, maybe build up their conditioning as you work. Because again, a lot of times you're going to be working in a step loading process where you're going to progressively increase the training load over that time. We want to be able to see how that training load looks as we're going. And by doing it and planning out multiple practices allows you to build that effectively, not only just from a technique and drill standpoint, but also from a conditioning and strength development standpoint as well. So here's an example of what I've done. Now, this may be hard to read, depends on the size of your screen, but this is from the notebook that I have. And so if you can see my video, you'll see that. So this is my notebook for this coming year's season. This is for the next 4 months. And everything I do wrestling related when it comes to practice planning will all be done in here first. All right. And you're seeing the first couple of pages that are in this. If you're able to see this on the left side, the picture on the left side is just me getting started, listing down those things that I want to. So here's my objectives, and I started listing down what are the things that we wanted to be able to work on during that time. So I pieced together this long list. Here we're getting started. This is week 1 for us. So like yesterday was our first practice for this next 4 months. We had some preseason leading up to it, but now we're actually in where we're going to be training on a much regular basis. And so now I'm putting together our plan for the week. So the first thing I started with, which are objectives. And so I just listed in my handwriting and term-wise what I wanted to accomplish. Down here at the bottom, I kind of listed how I want practice to kind of break up. I want to be able to split groups. We're going to work on some basic skills for 30 minutes. Strength will be a strength session almost every day for 20 minutes. We'll be introducing technique and doing technique session for 40. And then probably we'll have a drill or review session for 20 minutes during that time, because we typically practice right around 2 hours. We're not doing wrestling for 2 hours, but our time block is around that time. So we're doing different types of activities. On the other side, I actually started at the top by listing the first day of the week, but then I realized I had some other stuff that I wanted to. So the bottom, I just started listing drills and different activities that I wanted to use to help reinforce those concepts and those techniques in those areas that I wanted to work on. So I just made a list so that way I had it in front of me. Then if you turn the page of my notebook, here's the part on the right-hand side is exactly what I had planned for the week. So I just go down the week. So Monday through Friday, Saturday's a little below this, it cut off the bottom of the paper. And then I just started listing what are the things that I wanted to do in each of those days. Not specifically by time, but just here's the areas that I want to work on. Here are some drills that we want to do during that time. And then I piece those together. Once I have each day broken up, now I actually start putting times on it. And so directly next to it, here is day 1, Monday, November 2nd. And then here's our times. And you can start seeing how I started putting this time schedule together. And so this is the process that I take for every week and for every practice that I do. Now, once I have it planned out in this book, the next thing I do is type it out. So, here's the practice actually for today, the paper for today, but I'm going to type it out and I'm going to print it so that every coach has a copy of that practice plan so we know what we're doing. So, and even what I have on the paper, I'm actually going to type out more because I'm going to add more detail. I'm going to add more coaching points. I'm going to add some other parts to this as we go, but this is just the process of getting started. So this is when I think about the bigger picture, this is what I mean by the bigger picture. Don't just plan one practice, go do it, come back, and then think, okay, what are we going to do next? And, I think it's important to evaluate what you did, and you can make changes. I made some changes of what we're doing today from what I had originally based on what we did yesterday. But I like being able to blend it all together to make sure that I have a proper progression in this process. The next part here is looking at some fundamental steps to follow. And this is a little bit of review of the things that we have covered over the course of other webinars, but I thought it was important to just talk about that right after discussing the bigger picture. What are some things we need to have in our practices as we go? The first one here is to make sure we create objectives for each session. What is it that you want to accomplish with those athletes on that particular day? For me, I always have the list of objectives. I don't always write them down specifically on the plan, but I have them written down on my notebook. And then one of the first things I do at the beginning of practice is indicate to them, here's what our objectives are for the day. Here's what we want to get out of today's practice. Also, make sure you spend time planning with other coaches. Talk to the coaches, find out what they did, what they went through, what are some ideas and some suggestions that they have to help improve the practice as you're going forward. I know this is something I routinely do throughout the course of the season, particularly after we get done competing. I'm like, all right, what do we need to work on? What are those areas that we need to improve before we get to our next competition? And after this, what we're working on right now, because a lot of times in practice, we're splitting into smaller groups. And so after practice, what I like to do and what I'll start doing as we progress through this a little more throughout this week is talking to coaches and say, okay, how far did you get? What went well? What do you need to come back and circle back to so we know that we get that covered? But spend time planning with other coaches. I think it's a great way to make sure that you're on track of covering what you want to get there. And many times they have great ideas because they're actually the ones working with those athletes directly. Next one, always make sure you begin with a proper warm-up. I think that's an important part of anything is have that warm-up set. I actually changed our warm-up a little bit based on input from our leaders on our team because they've been through this. This is their 4th year on the team. And so they understand what they want and what they're looking for. And they said, hey, coach, can we do this? And I'm like, yep, let's do that. That sounds like a good idea. Let's make that adjustment. But we always begin with a proper warm-up to make sure we're ready to wrestle. I would recommend that if you have an opportunity, you teach your new skills and techniques early in practice, especially with younger athletes. I think the younger they are, the less their attention span is. So it's great to open up. And if you're going to teach new things, do that at the beginning when they're most focused, because as practice progresses, sometimes focus drops. So sometimes your drilling and your activities, your games, things like that are better at the end. Whereas at the beginning, it's really good to introduce those new techniques. As mentioned here, just building off that is try to end with some fun drills or activities to help improve skills or do some conditioning. I know that's what we did yesterday. That's how we ended practice with our 20-minute strength and conditioning session. So one of our coaches kind of put them around and the kids enjoyed it, kind of had fun. It was a breakup of what we had been doing. So it was a good change up for that part, but it's always good to kind of end with those things for practice. Another part that I'll talk about in a little bit more detail is the transitions from one activity to another. And the quicker you can have transitions, the better you're going to keep them engaged and focused in practice. If there's a long break between, sometimes it's hard to get them pulled back in to practice and be able to get, it takes them a while to get started again. So if you have some quick transitions, that's going to be better in your overall practice, is getting from one activity to the next. Another one is keeping wrestlers active, and mentioned this in previous webinars. One of the ratios that we really want to look for is a 1-to-4 ratio, where that's 1 minute of coaching or instruction to 4 minutes of actual participation in drilling and practicing those techniques. 1-to-4 is good. 1-to-3 is also would be good, but we don't want to get to where we're spending all of our time talking and none of the time where the athletes are actually practicing and doing the drills. So I'm a big proponent of getting them moving and then just adding in things as they go, but they're always active in what they're doing. Another thing that I would encourage is having a backup activity or drill, because I can tell you from personal experience, sometimes things look great on paper, and I think this is going to be a great drill, because a lot of times I'll create my own drills. If I see something I like, I'll just adapt it to what I like that works for us. And as I get doing it, I'm realizing this is not working how I thought it was. We need to switch gears and move to something else very quickly. So don't be afraid to have something. There's a backup activity that you can do very quickly, just to be able to keep working whatever skill or technique you want, in case what you have planned isn't going as well as you would hope. So always have that in that, something in background, maybe it's written on your practice plan, that here's what I'll go to if this doesn't work very well. And lastly here, one thing that I would always encourage a little bit is having some consistency in your practices. For us, our consistent part is typically our warm-up. We may do some variations as they go through that first 15 minutes, but that first 15 minutes is pretty much going to be the same 15 minutes every practice. That way, when they get there, they kind of know what to expect. We kind of get started. We're not having to teach things and teach them something new just to get them started. So having some consistency in how your practices go will lead to more efficient practices. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't change things up and you shouldn't have variation. I'm a big believer that there should be variations in practice. But I do believe that you got to be consistent from day to day, or you're constantly you're spending time. I wouldn't say wasting time, but you have to spend a lot of time getting that transition to the next activity because they're not used to it. It's always something new. So don't be afraid to have some things built in that are always consistent, that they're very aware of. That way you can move to it very quickly. Another aspect here is key components on a plan. What should be listed on every plan? And you can see the document off to the right is an example, kind of a template of a practice sheet that you could use to fill out. And so one of the things that you would have on there is the date. And on every practice plan, I have the date of exactly, what today's date is. As you saw at the top of my notebook, I also type that on the plan itself, making sure I have that. That way, when I reference it, I know when we did it. Your start and end times. Sometimes it's just a matter of we're going to start at this time and we're ending practice at this time. For me, I like to dictate exactly what my time period is as I go, because for me, I want to be able to make sure that I'm progressing through transition while I'm getting through the things that I want to get through, and I have time slots for each of those as we go. Now, it doesn't mean I'm going to stick to those to the T, but at least I have those down. I know exactly when I'm starting and ending each segment of practice. Your total length of practice. How long are you practicing? In one of our earlier webinars, we looked at the different practice times versus the age groups. Somewhere between 45 minutes to an hour, all the way up to as much as 2 hours potentially for practice based on your age group, and having that listed on there. For me, I don't list the total, but you can add up the total because I have every block done. So you can look at where we start, look where we end, and we know what the total is going to be. And I have that predetermined for practice as well on another document. Having a list of your objectives and communicating those, also important of what you want to accomplish that particular session. It's also good to indicate any health and safety concerns that you may have going into the practice. Maybe there's some drills or some activities that they need to make sure that they keep their head up in that process, or things that you need to remind them about to make sure that they stay safe. That would be important to make sure you document that on the practice. I know I covered a safety aspect. Yesterday, we were doing a head position drill with no arms, where we had to keep our hands behind our back, and one wrestler will be shooting, and we just had to work on blocking with our head and changing our level and moving our feet. But the key part here is making sure that they had to be in contact, that their heads had to be touching before this happened. Because if not, somebody may shoot, they drop their head, they're going to collide heads. That's not going to be a good situation. So making sure you address those safety concerns and having that documented on your plan. Also having any type of equipment that you may need listed on there. Like, for example, we may do some strength conditioning exercises later that involve using a jump rope, using kettlebells, using med balls. We'll have those things listed to make sure that we have those and we know that we need to get those ready before we transition into that part of practice. The next is having your activity objectives and descriptions. Not only having just what activity that you want to do, but then having the descriptions of what that is. Because, I try to make sure that I have these practices planned as such that if I'm not there, one of the other coaches is able to grab this plan and go run with it. So I've got some descriptions, I've got the objectives, what we want to accomplish, what are the key points. Those things are all listed on there, which leads to that next part, the key coaching points. We talked about when we introduced technique, and whenever we do that, there's different ways to do that. But one of the effective ways is to make sure that you break things down into the key coaching points that you want them to accomplish. And so I include that on the practice as well. So that way, if we break into small groups, here are the 2 or 3 main points that I really want them to focus on when they're teaching this technique or when they're doing this drill. So that way we know we're building off of that. Now, we may have to add, because as you know, there's just not 3 coaching points with every action we do. Like many times there's multiple ones, but we can't focus on all of them. So what are the main ones we want to get accomplished that day, and what do we want to focus on that day? So I try to list those on the plan as well. The next part here is estimating times of activities. I think this is what really separates the good coaches from the best coaches, is the ability to be able to estimate how long something is actually going to take. For example, I have a question that says, how long does it take to wrestle 10 one-minute situations? So you look and say, okay, I'm going to wrestle 1 minute goes, and we want to do 10 of them. Approximately how long does that take? So what are some things that you have to consider as a coach to make sure you're properly planning in the right amount of time for that activity? So one thing that you have to consider is the break between the goes. So you wrestle 1 minute, it's unlikely that you're going to go directly into the next minute without a break. Like you're going to stop them and then talk for a minute, a few seconds, and then start them again. So there's time in between there that we have to factor in. I think I only have one wrestling activity where we literally just 1 minute, 1 minute's up, the next person rolls in while that next minute's already started. But for the most part, every time we do a 1 minute live wrestling situation, there's going to be a break between there. Next one is if you have them find another partner, where they have to find a new partner, that's going to take time for them to go find a new partner. Like it's not going to be instantaneous. They're not going to be done with a one live go for 1 minute and then turn around and be ready and have another partner ready to go within 5 seconds. That's just not going to be realistic. So you have to factor in those times that aren't actually them actively doing the drill or doing the wrestling situation, whatever it is. All right. And those times are what I refer to as transitions. This is the time between sets, the time between activities within that set. And we talked about if we can have quick transitions, we're going to have a more efficient practice. We're going to be able to maximize our time with those athletes. So pre-planning those things out is an important part. All right. Now, one of those things is this has to be thought about for every activity that you do. Whether you're drilling or whether you're teaching technique, whether you're wrestling live, you need to estimate roughly how long will it take and how much time do you want to spend them working on this. And then you try to factor in the different parts of, am I going to have to stop and correct something? The better you can effectively plan those breaks and how that will go, the better your practice is going to be. because better transitions equal to more time practicing, which is what we're all trying to get out of with our athletes, is more time practicing. Because we don't, we sometimes we only know we have an hour and a half with those athletes. We want to get the best hour and a half we can. But if we're spending time trying to find new partners, we're taking time in between different activities, all of those things reduce the amount of time our athletes are actually training. And I think one thing for me that's so important here is planning transitions in gives you a much more accurate timeline of practice. Because I think one thing I know that I have a tendency, and I still do this a little bit, is I overplan. Like I have more things listed than what we're really probably going to be able to get to. Now, one of the reasons I overplan a little bit is I know I'm not going to get to everything. But if we do happen to get through things quickly, I want to have an activity ready to go. I don't want to have downtime trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. But if I can plan out those transitions, I know I have a much more accurate timeline of my practice, which means I know this activity is not going to run over the time. Because if an activity runs over the time you have planned for it, now you have to cut something else out other place. You can't just keep extending practice, extending practice, or it could end up being as long as, a 2-hour practice could be 3 hours because you're trying to, there was a lot of transition time in there that you didn't plan for. So for me, this is really an important process. And when I look at it, when I say, okay, how long does it take to wrestle 10 1-minute situations? For me, I'm probably going to factor in at least 15 minutes because I've got the 10 1-minute rest of the matches. Plus, they're going to take a break. I'm going to stop them. I'm probably going to correct something or talk about something. And then they're going to have to find a new partner because we're not going to wrestle probably the same person 10 times in a row. So I know that that's going to be 15 to 20 seconds every time in between those. And those 10 to 15 seconds, 20 seconds add up, 10 times 20 seconds. Now you're looking at an extra 3.5 minutes, on approximately right out of the gate. So I think that's an important part as a coach is you're looking at this is how do I know how long these are going to take? And you really just have to take time to think about it and use your experience as a coach to know this is what I can really get in during this time frame. Now that we have it planned and now we're ready for practice, now we have it written down, we're ready for practice. What are some tips to just running an effective practice with this? Number one is make it fun. Wrestling is a difficult sport and it can be very challenging, but I think we have to find a way to make it fun and just lively. And I think a lot of that has to do with how the coach approaches it. If the coach is excited and happy to be there and excited about it, the athletes that you coach take on the demeanor of their coach. So if you're happy, excited to be there, they're going to be more happy and excited. They might not be loving it, but they will certainly have a much better attitude approaching it. It's important also that all participants should be active. The only way to get better at wrestling is to wrestle and to practice. But if they're not training and they're not active, then they're not going to reach the level that they're capable of during that time period. So keep them active. And just in general, from an enjoyment standpoint, particularly with younger athletes, they like to participate. They want to participate. They don't want to stand around. So keep them active. And I think this quote from Confucius is a great one, just from in general why it's so important to be active. I hear and I forget. I see and I remember. I do and I understand. The more you have them doing at practice, the better they're going to understand it and the better they're going to get. I actually had nearly the same conversation with the kids that I teach this today. I had this conversation with, I can get up and I can lecture as much as I want. You're probably not going to remember a lot of it, and you're probably not going to know how to do it. But if I can get you doing and get you practicing doing the things, even if you're making mistakes, that's better than just listening to it. So keep them active. Another part here as a coach is to follow the 3 C's. And this was one of the things that we covered in the very first webinars we did back in May, which was the 3 C's when communicating, which are be clear in your communication, be concise, and be consistent. Clear is making sure, like sometimes it looks and it sounds clear to me, but it's not necessarily clear to them. So we need to make sure that we clear up any misconceptions there are. That happens by being concise. Many times we can over talk and go through so many different points that they lose what the main point is. So be concise in what you have. Because one thing somebody told me one time is if you can't be concise, then you probably don't know it as well as you should. And another one is be consistent. I think as a coach, one thing we have to be on a daily basis is just consistent with how we approach practice, consistent with what we're saying, because athletes, they develop, they understand what happens and they can meet those expectations. But there's always a change in personality, always a change in how they communicate. They can't ever figure it out. So be consistent. So follow those 3 C's. I think you'll have a very effective practice. The next one is giving positive feedback. In that we talked about a ratio of 1 to 4 for activity, speaking, coaching versus, being active. That 1 to 4 ratio is a great ratio for giving positive feedback. We need to give 4 positive comments for every negative feedback we give an athlete. Like the athletes of today have changed from what they were 20 years ago. Like times have changed. Like they don't like to get told all the time that they're doing things wrong. They know if they're doing it wrong. But if you can build them up, then when you do have to correct something, that correction is not going to completely destroy them and destroy their confidence as they go. So build them up, give them 4 positive comments to every negative comment, negative feedback you have to give them. Another thing that I think is important here is focus on improving in a few areas versus trying to improve in everything. Most of our practices that I have, we're really going to focus each day on 1 to 2 areas that we really want to get better at that day. And so yesterday we focused on stance and positioning. That's mostly what we did was in our stance and how we move our feet and our positioning with our head. And then we just built and adapted off that. That was our main area. That was our main focus. And every day we're going to have a focal point. So focus on just trying to prove a few things, not trying to get the entire spectrum in one practice. It's very difficult to do that and be effective. And the last one I'd always recommend is arrive early and welcome your participants. Whenever as a coach, I believe you should be one of the first ones at practice and one of the last ones to leave. And when they get there, you welcome them in, and that way they know that you're excited for them to be there and they're ready to practice. So for me, I always check our athletes in when they come in. It gives me a chance to talk to them, find out how school went that day, and then just be able to get that conversation started. And then we're off to a positive start before we've even started practice. So if we want to have an effective practice, it even begins right as they're walking in the door. So that is a few things on here in designing and implementing practices. If you have questions, please feel free to, ask them now. I know there's only a few of you here on, but if you have a question in the question and answer box on Zoom here, you can certainly type in your question and I will gladly answer that. So I'll give you a minute here or two to ask any questions that you may have. And if you don't, that's fine too. You're certainly more than welcome to, if you have a question later, to reach out to me via email, and I will get back to you certainly as soon as possible. That's our bell to transition from class to class right now. This is my time period off. So this is why it's always scheduled during these times of, for my time, because it fits into my school schedule the best. All right, so I don't see any questions, so I'm just gonna, kind of go to the last part here, just kind of summing this up. And I thought this is an excellent quote to really end our whole webinar series on the webinar series on developing practice plans. And it says, never begin the day until it's finished on paper. This to me is exactly the case when it comes to practice. I need to finish it and write this down and have it on paper before I even walk through the door, because I know I'm going to get more out of practice and our athletes are going to be able to improve at a much greater rate because I know exactly what we're going to be doing and I have it on paper when I walk in the door. And I encourage this not only maybe for practice, but in life in general. Know what are those things you're going to get done each day, have them down on paper, have a plan, and I promise you, you're going to get more out of yourself and you're going to get more out of your athletes if you have that planned out first. So thank you again for attending the webinar. I certainly appreciate you taking the time, and I see a lot of familiar faces from week to week that are on here. So I appreciate you taking the time to join in. Certainly, be on the lookout for other webinars as we kind of keep progressing through and work through this pandemic, as things, cases seem to be rising and we seem to be getting into more, less able to do our wrestling, our activities and our tournaments. Please continue to educate, learn, and grow as a coach. I know that's one of the main things that I've been focusing on in this off season, during this last 6 months is learning as much as I can about some areas that I was really interested in that I thought would help benefit me as a coach. And I would encourage you to do that as well as a coach, is continue to learn, keep looking for resources. And as we progress, we will continue to develop more webinars and more series. And I'd encourage you to get to the United World Wrestling Academy page. As we develop more courses, those will continue to go there. So thank you again, and I hope you have a great day and a great training sessions. And if you have any questions, please let me know.